The night it all began, I wasn't thinking about Liam, our marriage, or even the tension that had settled into our lives like an unwelcome guest. I was standing in a crowded art gallery downtown, sipping wine and nodding at half-understood conversations about brushstrokes and color palettes. Liam hated these events. He used to come back when we were in love, or at least when he was trying to be. But tonight, I was alone. That was fine by me. For once, it felt freeing. I let the wine settle warmly in my chest and moved from painting to painting, feeling like I was someone else entirely, someone who could leave the worries of a suburban marriage at the door. And then I noticed him. He was watching me from across the room, leaning casually against the wall, dressed in a crisp navy suit. He wasn't like the other men at these events, who looked either bored or too eager. He had this calm confidence about him, the kind that made you want to know what he was thinking. When our eyes met, he smiled, a small, knowing smile that made my stomach flip. I told myself to look away, to focus on the art, but my body didn't listen. Instead, I smiled back. He approached, slowly, as if he knew I wouldn't turn him away. "Noticed you've been staring at the same painting for a while," he said. His voice was low and smooth. "You must really love abstract art." I laughed softly, caught off guard. "Not exactly. I was trying to decide if it's brilliant or just random splashes of paint." "Art imitates life," he replied, stepping closer. "Sometimes the brilliance is in the randomness." It was a cheesy line, but it worked. We talked for hours that night. He introduced himself as Marcus, a local gallery owner who was curating the exhibit. I didn't tell him much about myself, just enough to seem intriguing, I hoped. I didn't mention Liam, the kids, or the fact that I was trying to remember what it felt like to be noticed. The moment that changed everything came weeks later, during a rainy afternoon. It was a small detail, something most people would overlook, but it pulled the rug out from under Liam's feet. It was a Friday evening, and Liam came home earlier than expected. Usually, he worked late into the night, locked in his office or hunched over his laptop. But tonight, he walked through the door at 7:15, surprising even the kids, who looked up from their video games with raised eyebrows. I was in the kitchen, pretending to prep dinner, but really scrolling through Instagram on my phone. His unannounced arrival startled me, and I almost dropped the cutting board. "You're home early," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. My heart skipped, but not because I was happy to see him. "I had a meeting cancelled," he replied casually, shrugging out of his jacket and hanging it on the back of a dining chair. He loosened his tie and walked over to me, sniffing the air. "What's for dinner?" "Chicken stir-fry," I lied. The chicken was still frozen solid in the fridge. "It's almost ready." He nodded but didn't leave the kitchen, which made me uneasy. Usually, he'd disappear into the living room or his office, without much conversation. Tonight, though, he lingered, leaning against the counter and watching me. "You okay?" he asked after a moment, his tone light but curious. "Yeah," I said, a bit too quickly. "Why?" He shrugged again, but there was something in his eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there in months. It unnerved me. I focused on chopping vegetables, keeping my head down to avoid his gaze. The air felt heavy, and I couldn't tell if it was just my paranoia or if Liam was genuinely suspicious of something. And then, without warning, he asked, "Who's Marcus?" My hands froze mid-chop. The knife clattered against the cutting board, and I felt the color drain from my face. My mind raced, trying to piece together how he could possibly know that name. I hadn't left any messages on my phone. I hadn't spoken about Marcus to anyone. How the hell did Liam know? "I don't know who that is," I stammered, avoiding his eyes. "Why?" "Funny," he said, his voice low and calm but tinged with an edge that made my stomach churn. "Because I overheard your friend Julie mention him at the gym this morning. Something about an art gallery and how charming he is." "Julie." My breath hitched. I hadn't even thought about her running her mouth. She always had a knack for picking up on things, even when I didn't explicitly tell her. She must have pieced it together from the little hints I'd dropped about my new friend. Julie has an active imagination, I said, trying to brush it off. She probably just misunderstood something I said. Did she? Liam pressed, taking a step closer. His calm demeanor was unnerving. He wasn't shouting or accusing, but his questions were razor-sharp, each one slicing through my excuses. Yes, I said firmly, finally looking up at him. I don't know what she told you, but Marcus is just a guy who runs the gallery where I've been going for events. Nothing more. Liam studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't believe me, that much was clear. But he didn't push further. Instead, he nodded slowly and stepped back. All right, he said simply. I just wanted to make sure. I forced a tight smile, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach as he left the kitchen. The moment he was out of sight, I grabbed my phone and texted Julie. Why the hell are you talking to Liam about Marcus? I typed furiously, my fingers trembling. Her reply came almost immediately. What are you talking about? I didn't say anything to Liam. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. If Julie wasn't the one who told him, then how did he know? The possibilities swirled in my mind, each one more terrifying than the last. Had he followed me to the gallery? Gone through my things? Hired someone to watch me? The idea seemed absurd, but so did the fact that he knew Marcus's name. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Liam was unusually attentive, sitting with the kids during dinner and even helping with the dishes, a task he usually avoided like the plague. I couldn't tell if he was genuinely trying to reconnect or if he was watching me, waiting for me to slip up. When the kids were in bed, he settled into the living room with a book while I pretended to be engrossed in Netflix. Every so often, I'd glance at him out of the corner of my eye, but his expression was unreadable. It was maddening. Finally, around 11 p.m., he stood and stretched. I'm heading to bed, he said, looking at me expectantly. It wasn't unusual for us to go to bed at different times, but tonight, his gaze lingered a moment too long. I'll be up in a bit, I replied, trying to sound casual. He nodded and disappeared down the hallway. As soon as I heard the bedroom door click shut, I grabbed my phone and opened Marcus's number. We need to talk, I typed, hesitating for only a second before hitting send. His reply came almost instantly. What's going on? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could I even explain the situation without sounding like a paranoid wreck? Before I could respond, a notification popped up, an email from Liam. Confused, I opened it and immediately felt the blood drain from my face. It was a single line of text, "Do you think I'm stupid?" Attached to the email were photos, dozens of them. Me and Marcus at the gallery. At the coffee shop. In his car. The timestamps on the photos were damning, painting a picture of a relationship that was anything but innocent. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Liam had been following me, documenting my every move. He knew everything. The next morning started with a heavy silence. Liam acted as if nothing had happened the night before, but every glance he cast in my direction felt loaded. I could tell he was waiting, baiting me, and I hated that I had no choice but to step into his trap. I spent most of the morning in the kitchen, pretending to clean but mostly trying to figure out what to do. Denial wasn't an option anymore, not with those pictures. He had proof, and no amount of excuses could erase that. At 10:32 a.m., while the kids were watching TV in the living room, Liam walked into the kitchen. He was holding his phone, scrolling idly, but his eyes were fixed on me. We need to talk, he said, his tone flat but firm. It wasn't a request. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, stalling. About what? He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You know what? I glanced toward the living room, but the kids were absorbed in their show, oblivious. Still, I lowered my voice. Not here. Fine, he said, pocketing his phone. Garage. Now. I followed him out, my heart pounding in my chest. The garage was cold, the air thick with the smell of motor oil and damp cardboard. Liam shut the door behind us and turned to face me, his expression hard. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Say it," he demanded, breaking the silence. I blinked. "Say what?" "Don't play dumb, Alice," he snapped, his voice rising slightly. "I've got photos. I've got timestamps. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about." My mouth was dry, my thoughts scrambled. "It's not what you think." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Not what I think. So, you're going to tell me that meeting some random guy behind my back, riding around in his car, and having coffee dates isn't what it looks like?" "It's not like that," I insisted, my voice trembling. "It wasn't an affair. We're just friends." "Friends," he repeated slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Do you think I'm stupid?" I flinched, and he took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Do you have any idea how pathetic it was, sitting outside those places, watching my wife act like a love-struck teenager with another man?" I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. "I didn't mean for it to go that far." "That far?" he interrupted, his voice booming now. "So, it did go somewhere." I froze, realizing my slip. "No, I mean." "Save it," he barked, cutting me off. "I don't need your half-assed excuses. I want the truth." His words hung in the air like a challenge. I wanted to lie, to minimize what had happened, but the fury in his eyes told me that wouldn't work. He already knew too much. "I was lonely," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Lonely?" His laugh was harsh. "That's your excuse? You were lonely?" "You weren't there, Liam," I shot back, my own anger bubbling to the surface. "You were always working, always too tired or too busy to notice me." I felt invisible. "So that makes it okay to sneak around with some asshole?" he fired back. "You didn't even have the guts to talk to me about it. You just went behind my back." "Because talking to you never changes anything," I shouted. "You don't listen, Liam. You never have. You're married to your job, not me." He stared at me, his jaw tightening. "So, what? You decided to find someone who would pay attention to you. Someone who would screw you in the back of his car while I was out working to pay for this goddamn house?" "It wasn't like that," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I never slept with him. I swear." "Do you think that makes it better?" he demanded, his voice cold. "Do you think that erases the lies? The sneaking around? The fact that you betrayed me and our kids?" I didn't have an answer. My hands were trembling, my chest heaving as I struggled to keep it together. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg for forgiveness, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The damage was done. "You know," he said after a long pause, his voice quieter now but no less intense, "I thought I knew you. I thought we had something real. But I guess I was just a paycheck to you." "That's not fair," I said, my voice shaking. "I've stood by you for 14 years, Liam. I've raised our kids, kept this house running." "And that gave you a free pass to cheat," he interrupted. "Don't you dare try to make yourself the victim here, Alice. You're not the one who's been lied to. You're not the one who's had your trust shattered." His words cut deep, and tears burned at the corners of my eyes. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that it wasn't as black and white as he made it seem, but I knew he wouldn't hear me. "What happens now?" I asked finally, my voice barely audible. Liam stared at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't know," he said at last. "But don't think for a second that I'm going to just sweep this under the rug." He turned and walked back into the house, leaving me standing alone in the cold garage. My legs felt weak, and I leaned against the workbench for support, my mind racing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. And I had no idea how I was going to fix it. Liam had always been a man of action, even if he wasn't the most expressive. When faced with problems at work, he tackled them methodically, step by step, until they were resolved. I knew he would apply the same approach to this situation, but I wasn't prepared for just how cold and calculated he could be. The first sign of his revenge came subtly, almost invisibly. He didn't yell, break things, or storm out of the house. No, Liam was smarter than that. He started with the finances, a realm I had largely left to him during our marriage. For years, I trusted him to manage the money, to make decisions about investments and bills while I focused on the home and the kids. But now, that trust was being weaponized against me. A week after our confrontation in the garage, I tried to use my debit card to pay for groceries, only to have it declined. Embarrassed, I fumbled with another card, but that one was declined as well. I stood there in the checkout line, heat rising to my cheeks as the cashier waited patiently. Eventually, I had to leave the groceries behind and walk out empty-handed. When I got home, I found Liam sitting in the living room, his laptop open on the coffee table. He didn't even look up when I walked in. "My debit card didn't work," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," he replied coolly, still typing. "I froze the accounts." "What?" I stared at him, stunned. "Why would you do that?" He finally looked up, his expression calm but icy. "Because I don't see why I should keep funding your lifestyle while you're sneaking around with another man." "It wasn't like that," I said, the words sounding hollow even to me. "Save it," he snapped, his tone sharpening. "You want to rebuild trust? Fine. But until I feel like I can believe a word you say, I'm taking control of the money." "That's not fair," I shouted, anger flaring in my chest. "You don't get to punish me like this." "Oh, I think I do," he replied, his voice low and firm. "You've been lying to me for months. You don't get to act like the victim here." I wanted to argue, to shout that he was being unreasonable, but deep down, I knew I had no leg to stand on. Liam wasn't doing this out of spite, he was making a point. And the worst part was, it was working. I felt powerless, dependent on him in a way I hadn't realized until now. But the finances were just the beginning. The next blow came a few days later, when I picked up the kids from school. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed a moving truck parked in front of the house. My heart sank as I saw Liam standing on the porch, directing two movers as they carried boxes out of the house. "What's going on?" I demanded as I got out of the car. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "I'm moving my things out." "Moving out?" My voice wavered. "You're leaving?" "For now," he said simply. "I think some time apart will be good for everyone." "What about the kids?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "They'll stay here," he said, glancing at the car where they were still sitting, watching us. "This is their home. I'll come by every day to see them. But I can't be around you right now." I wanted to beg him to stay, to argue that we could work things out, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Liam was done talking. He had made up his mind, and nothing I said would change it. Over the next week, he systematically dismantled every aspect of our shared life. He moved into a small apartment across town, taking only what he needed and leaving the rest for me and the kids. He canceled our joint memberships, put the house utilities in my name, and even had the nerve to call my parents and tell them about the situation. That was the worst part, having to face my family and explain why my marriage was falling apart. My mother, always the voice of reason, was less sympathetic than I'd hoped. "You made your bed, Alice," she said bluntly when I called her in tears. "Now you have to lie in it." The final blow came a month later, on a Saturday morning. I woke up to the sound of the doorbell ringing and found a courier standing on the porch with a manila envelope. "Are you Alice Bennett?" he asked. "Yes," I said warily. "This is for you," he said, handing me the envelope. I opened it right there, my stomach sinking as I saw the words, "Petition for Dissolution of Marriage," printed across the top. Liam was filing for divorce. I felt the air leave my lungs as I flipped through the pages. He wasn't just ending our marriage, he was going for full custody of the kids. In the accompanying letter, his lawyer outlined a detailed case against me, citing my adulterous behavior and emotional neglect as grounds for his claim. I sank to the floor, clutching the envelope as tears streamed down my face. This was it. This was Liam's revenge. He wasn't yelling, throwing things, or lashing out. He was calmly and methodically cutting me out of his life, piece by piece. And the worst part? I couldn't blame him. I had destroyed our marriage, and now I was paying the price. Liam's notice of divorce hit me harder than I could have imagined. For weeks, I carried the envelope around like a heavy secret, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to fight it, to throw myself at his feet and beg him to reconsider. But another part of me, the part that knew I had ruined everything, understood that this might be the only way forward. He came by daily, as he said he would, to see the kids. He was calm, polite even, but there was an undeniable wall between us. He rarely spoke to me unless it was absolutely necessary, and even then, it was clipped, professional, like we were strangers forced to co-parent. One Wednesday evening, after the kids were in bed, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, closure, something. I waited for him to finish helping Daniel with his homework and walked into the living room, where he was gathering his things to leave. "Liam," I said quietly, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay composed. "Can we talk?" He looked up, his expression guarded. "About what?" "About us," I said, gesturing to the couch. "Please." He hesitated, then sighed and sat down. I took the seat across from him, my hands gripping my knees as if to keep myself grounded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. "I got the papers," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good," he said simply. "Then you know where I stand." "Do you really want to do this?" I asked, my throat tightening. "And everything?" His eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of emotion, pain, anger, disappointment. "Do you think I want this?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "Do you think I spent 14 years building a life with you just to throw it away?" "Then why?" "Why?" he interrupted, leaning forward. "You're seriously asking me why? After everything you've done?" "I made a mistake," I said, my voice cracking. "But it wasn't an affair, Liam. I didn't sleep with him." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "You think that makes it better? That because you didn't cross some arbitrary line, it erases the lies, the sneaking around, the betrayal?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," I said, tears streaming down my face now. I was lonely, Liam. You were never here." "And that excuses it?" he snapped, his voice rising. "That makes it okay for you to run off and play house with someone else while I was out working my ass off to provide for this family?" "No," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "It doesn't excuse it. But I wasn't the only one who let this marriage fall apart." He stared at me, his jaw tight. "What are you saying? That this is my fault?" "I'm saying it's both of us," I said, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "We stopped trying, Liam. We stopped talking. You buried yourself in work, and you cheated," he finished for me, his voice cold. "Don't sugarcoat it, Alice. Call it what it is." I flinched, but didn't argue. He was right, even if I hated hearing it. I had cheated, not physically, but emotionally. I had betrayed his trust, and no amount of excuses or justifications could change that. "I want to fix this," I said after a long pause, my voice trembling. "I want to fix us." He laughed again, shaking his head. "Fix us? Alice, you don't fix something by smashing it into 1,000 pieces, and then saying, 'Oops.'" "Please," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. "We can go to counseling. We can work through this. You should have thought about that before you decided to look for whatever the hell you thought you were missing in someone else," he said, his voice sharp. "You can't break something and then act shocked when it doesn't go back to the way it was." I felt the tears spilling over, hot and unrelenting. "Do you even love me anymore?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, his expression softening for just a moment before hardening again. "I don't know," he said finally. "I used to. But now, I don't even recognize the person sitting in front of me." His words hit me like a blow, leaving me gasping for air. I had expected anger, resentment, even hatred, but not this. Not the quiet, devastating truth that I had lost the man I loved, not because he stopped loving me, but because I had pushed him away. "What about the kids?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What happens to them?" "They'll be fine," he said firmly. "They don't need to see us pretending everything's okay when it's not. They deserve better than that." "And what about us?" I pressed, my voice breaking. "Do we even try, or is this it?" "This is it," he said, his tone final. "I'm done, Alice. I can't keep pretending. I've already filed the papers. You need to sign them." For a moment, I thought I might collapse under the weight of his words. My chest ached, my vision blurred, and all I could hear was the sound of my own ragged breathing. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice barely audible. "For everything." He stood, gathering his things, and slinging his bag over his shoulder. "I hope you mean that," he said quietly, his voice devoid of anger now, only sadness. "But it doesn't change anything." He walked to the door, pausing briefly before turning back to look at me. "This isn't what I wanted, Alice. But you left me no choice." And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the empty living room, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. I signed the divorce papers 3 days later. There was no grand ceremony to it, no moment of clarity or catharsis. I simply sat at the dining room table, pen in hand, and scrawled my name at the bottom of each page. The house was silent, the kids at school, and Liam had taken to coming by only when he knew I wouldn't be there. His lawyer had been meticulous, leaving no stone unturned in dividing our assets and ensuring the kids' needs were accounted for. It was clean, efficient, and utterly devoid of emotion, exactly like Liam had been in those final weeks. Once the papers were in the envelope, ready to be mailed, I sat there staring at them for what felt like hours. This was it. 14 years reduced to a series of legal documents. There was no going back now, no undoing the choices that had led us here. The kids adjusted better than I expected. They were upset at first, of course, angry, confused, hurt. But Liam and I both made an effort to shield them from the worst of it. He remained a constant presence in their lives, picking them up from school, taking them out for ice cream, and making sure they knew he wasn't abandoning them. For me, the transition wasn't as smooth. With the accounts under Liam's control until the divorce was finalized, I had to scramble to figure out finances. I took on freelance work and part-time gigs, anything to keep the bills paid and the house running. It was humbling, exhausting, and at times, humiliating. But it was necessary. The hardest part wasn't the financial strain, though. It was the loneliness. The house felt cavernous without Liam's presence. I missed the sound of his keys jingling in the door, the low murmur of his voice as he took calls in his office, even the way he would leave his dirty coffee cups on the counter despite my constant reminders. I missed him. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to call him. I couldn't face the humiliation of begging for something I knew was gone. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. He was browsing the wine aisle, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, his signature easy smile lighting up his face when he saw me. "Alice," he said warmly, stepping closer. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "It has." We chatted briefly, catching up on surface-level things. He asked how I was doing, and I gave him a vague answer about adjusting to changes. I didn't mention the divorce, and he didn't ask. "Maybe we could grab coffee sometime," he suggested, his tone hopeful. I hesitated. For a moment, I considered saying yes, letting myself fall back into the easy charm that had once been so tempting. But then I thought of Liam, of the pain I'd caused him, the trust I'd shattered. I don't think that's a good idea, I said finally, my voice steady. Marcus looked surprised, but nodded. I understand. Take care of yourself, Alice. You too, I replied, watching as he walked away. As I stood there, alone in the wine aisle, I realized something. I didn't want to repeat the mistakes I'd made. Marcus had been a symptom of a deeper problem, not the solution. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Marcus at the grocery store. He was browsing the wine aisle, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, his signature easy smile lighting up his face when he saw me. Alice, he said warmly, stepping closer. It's been a while. Yeah, I replied, forcing a smile. It has. We chatted briefly, catching up on surface-level things. He asked how I was doing, and I gave him a vague answer about adjusting to changes. I didn't mention the divorce, and he didn't ask. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime, he suggested, his tone hopeful. I hesitated. For a moment, I considered saying yes, letting myself fall back into the easy charm that had once been so tempting. But then I thought of Liam, of the pain I'd caused him, the trust I'd shattered. I don't think that's a good idea, I said finally, my voice steady. Marcus looked surprised, but nodded. I understand. Take care of yourself, Alice. You too, I replied, watching as he walked away. As I stood there, alone in the wine aisle, I realized something. I didn't want to repeat the mistakes I'd made. Marcus had been a symptom of a deeper problem, not the solution. The months that followed were far from perfect, but they were a start. Liam and I worked hard to establish a co-parenting routine that prioritized the kids' well-being. We communicated more openly than we had in years, though the conversations were strictly about schedules and logistics. As for me, I began to rebuild. I found a full-time job at a local nonprofit, one that gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I started therapy, not just to process the divorce, but to understand why I had made the choices I did. Most importantly, I began to forgive myself. Liam and I would never be what we once were, but we had found a way to coexist, for the kids, and for ourselves. And while the pain of what I had lost would never fully disappear, it no longer defined me. In the end, I learned that healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about accepting it, learning from it, and finding the strength to move forward. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could.